Okay, so we are going to appoint members to our Byrne SCIP Advisory Board, and I would like to propose the following two members. From Peer Reentry Leadership Academy, a behavioral health entity in San Diego, I would propose Andrea Dauber Griffin. She present? Come on up. And from the BSCC, our very own legal counsel, Eloisa Tutiama. And you may sit where your little name tags are.
No, you're fine. Thank you. I thought these made up characters. I didn't know who this was. That's why I scoot my stuff over there, yeah.
We then move to the agenda.
And then we move to the agenda.
Thank you. And we have two other individuals present. I wonder where that agenda is, if somebody might help me for the meeting within the meeting.
It's in your binder as well.
Thank you. Well, it's only fitting that it doesn't come up. Okay, there we go. We would call the meeting to order. We do welcome and introductions. Katie?
Welcome, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Andrea and Eloisa, for being available to augment the board membership with your two subject matter slots. Eloisa is a colleague here in the office, and so she's filling the role of legal counsel. And I just had the pleasure of talking with Andrea on a Zoom meeting a couple of weeks ago. She brings tremendous expertise as a behavioral health services provider, and she knows a great deal about working with and supporting community-based organizations of a variety of sizes, and recognizes the importance of including people with lived experience in our processes. Madam Chair, do you want to ask our new members to say hello?
Be wonderful. Because we know Eloisa is quite the extrovert. She can't wait for this part.
Absolutely. You can tell by the reaction on my face. Good morning, board and committee, advisory committee and members of the public. My name is Eloisa Tuitama. I have actually been with the BSCC. I'm starting on 8 years now. I actually started as an analyst, then as a field representative, and I'm now really happy to serve in this legal capacity, this new role, and learning so much from Aaron. Prior to that, I actually worked in a nonprofit and actually for a government agency overseas. So I'm just really happy to be here and serve on this committee in any capacity or anything, in any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Dr. Andrea Dauber Griffin. I am here representing the Neighborhood House Association, which is a nonprofit in San Diego County. This is very intimidating. I've worked with NHA for over 7 years, and I oversee our in-reach and reentry services. I also serve on the Commission on Police Practices in San Diego. I serve on the ATI, Alternatives to Incarceration Advisory Board, and I teach sociology in prison. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to collaborating.
We're very happy to have you, and thank you for responding quickly and coming to us and doing this today. And please don't be intimidated. We just look gruff. We're really actually kind of a nice group of people. So it's really a pleasure to have you. So the overview, I assume, Ian, thank you, Ian, coming back up. We've seen you earlier in an earlier meeting. I felt I saw you today. So
Brief passing, man.
thank you. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, Madam Chair and advisory board members. Again, my name is Ian Silva, and I am still a field representative with the Corrections Planning and Grant Division. I think that's an obligatory joke. I apologize. I am here to provide the advisory board members with an overview of the Byrne State Crisis Intervention Program, or as I said, we call it Byrne SCIP. The Byrne SCIP program requires that the program budget and a program and budget plan be approved by the advisory board, and staff anticipates presenting the plan for approval to the advisory board in the April meeting. As I previously mentioned, the Bureau of Justice Assistance released a federal solicitation for the Byrne SCIP program in October of 2022, as authorized by the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act of 2022. Byrne SCIP program provides funding to implement state gun crisis intervention court proceedings and related gun program and or initiatives, including but not limited to extreme risk protection orders, mental health courts, drug courts, and veteran treatment courts. In its solicitation, the Bureau of Justice Assistance listed a number of program activities for which the Byrne SCIP funding may be used. One such activity listed was the implementation of programs for extreme risk protection orders, or as they're known in California, gun violence restraining orders, or GVROs. GVROs empower family members, healthcare providers, school officials, or law enforcement to petition a court to temporarily prevent a person from accessing firearms if they are found to be a danger to themselves or others. In addition to the implementation of GVRO programs, the solicitation also listed training for judiciary and court staff on GVRO proceedings and training on GVROs for family members or first responders. BJA's solicitation also listed outreach to community members, stakeholders, municipal leaders, law enforcement agencies, and those engaging at risk in individuals as eligible activities. Finally, BJA included related court-based behavioral health deflection and gun safety programs or initiatives as eligible activities. These included specialized court-based programs such as drug, mental health, and veteran treatment courts, including those that specifically accept clients with firearm violations, behavioral health deflection for those at risk to themselves or others, and funding for law enforcement agencies to safely secure, store, track, and return relinquished guns. As I mentioned earlier, as the designated state administrating agency for Byrne SCIP, the BSCC submitted an application in December of 2022 for approximately $29.9 million in formula funding. As you may note on the chart on the screen, Byrne SCIP requires states to allocate pass-through amounts for specific jurisdictions, which I will talk about later when I discuss the BSCC's tentative plan for Byrne SCIP program. I should also note that the results of BSCC's application are currently pending. One of the requirements of the Byrne SCIP program is that applicants must establish a state crisis intervention advisory board, thus the establishment of this body. The board must inform and guide the state's gun violence reduction programs and initiatives, and must include, but are not limited to, representatives from law enforcement, the community, courts, prosecution, behavioral health providers, victim services, and legal counsel. Program and budget plans must be developed in coordination with the Byrne SCIP program requires the program and budget plans must be developed in coordination with the advisory board, and evidence of the advisory board's approval of those plans must be provided to BJA. In a few minutes, I will discuss the staff's preliminary program and budget plan for Byrne SCIP. By way of preview, that plan includes subawards to the Judicial Council of California to expand and enhance collaborative courts. However, before I do that, I would like to introduce Francine Byrne, Director of the Judicial Council of California's Criminal Justice Services, Operations, and Program Division. We've asked Francine to join us here today to provide the advisory board with an overview of the Judicial Council's proposed part in the Byrne SCIP program. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Director Francine Byrne.
Hello again, Francine.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for being here.
I can mess something up if I bring this down. Can't see everybody.
Yeah, there you go.
Always happens. Oh, yeah, then we have to adjust that. Maybe you get a step stool. That's what I need. I have to bring stilts with me. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. I really appreciate being invited to be here to talk about this program. As Ian mentioned, my name is Francine Byrne, and I've been in this space for a while with these Byrne grants and have often said, but there's no relation. But I just found out about a week ago, I am related, apparently. Yes, I don't know how yet. but I'll probably spend the weekend on ancestry.com and Google and 23andMe. Anyway, so Edward Byrne was a police officer who was killed in the line of duty, and that's what this is about. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the program that we hope to be implementing, the programs with this funding. You probably know that California has some of the strictest gun laws in the country, but how in the wake of the most recent happenings the last few weeks, it's painfully obvious that there's much more we can and should be doing, but the local, federal, and state levels. One of the beneficial things about this funding and the enabling legislation, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, is that it does provide states with some flexibility. So the states are, of course, very, very varied in their approaches to gun legislation and relinquishment procedures. And this allows us, each state, to kind of look at what areas have existing resources that we can leverage and policies and infrastructure so we can get the most out of the money that we will be requesting. We have the benefit specifically of an infrastructure related to gun relinquishment procedures in the criminal court system. Ian mentioned that there's a big emphasis on the emergency violence protective orders. We call them GVROs. Most of you probably know about that. But that's on the civil side. I just want to make some distinction as why we chose. I'm open to questions. And we are actually, I believe, the first state that had one of these gun laws up. We're already a little bit farther down the road than some of the other states that are lifting up their programs. So what we would like to do, though, is to look at the holes in the system that we have and try to plug them in to the extent possible. I think, oh, sorry. Okay, so we will be looking at these two major initiatives. One is to conduct research on the criminal side to identify the best practices in terms of firearms relinquishment. And we will also, as Ian mentioned, be using it to fund programs that address behavioral health needs for people in the criminal court system who are considered the most likely to use gun or be the victims of gun violence. And that comes from the legislation itself. Okay, so the first part is the firearms relinquishment procedures. So most of you probably know that Prop 63 that was passed in 2016 did a number of things, including restricting ammunition for high capacity rifles and increasing background checks. And it also set forth some procedures to sort of codify in criminal courts if someone is convicted of a felon or a number of different misdemeanors, what the process should be for them to relinquish their gun. So it created a process that is implemented on the criminal side. However, we don't know a whole lot about what is happening, how well it's being implemented. We do know it's being implemented across the state in a variety of different ways. And but we don't know how effective it is. We haven't really looked into sort of what the best practices is or are around this. What we know is that the anticipated number of guns that we thought would be relinquished when Prop 63 passed is far less than is actually happening. I assume that all of you in the room with your subject matter expertise probably all have different ideas of what could happen in terms of with the Prop 63 procedures and ways to improve it. And we may very well come back to and ask for some of that, but we just don't know completely what the issues are. So the first things we want to do with this project is to really survey the counties, and would go through the courts because that's where the judicial council, but we can talk a little bit more about the other partners in this. But we would survey them, conduct some intensive research to find out how each and every county is actually receiving the firearms and notifying people, sending probation out, how they're adhering to all the procedures set forth in Prop 63. So the first thing would be that we do work closely with the Bureau of Firearms at the DOJ on a number of different projects. And so we will be working with them as well on that. Some of you may know that last year the state did provide funding to increase the civil side of relinquishment procedures that went through the Judicial Council. So that's another reason why we didn't consider this pot of funding for that state. There's a few other reasons why it wouldn't be appropriate for California. I won't go into those now. But so there is a process right now that's providing grants to the courts and hopefully sub-grants to law enforcement through the courts. And I understand why that can get complicated and is not always the maybe most efficient way, but as the Judicial Council, that's the only way we have the process to do so. So with this, the civil side, then we'll be doing a lot of things that Ian mentioned. But they don't have that sort of policy in place that we have on the criminal side. So we will be coordinating with them and their efforts to sort of show them what's already in place in the criminal side, what the processes are, and then sort of leveraging the resources in terms of trainings and what have you that they'll be conducting to sort of round out that project with the criminal side. Is there any questions on that? That's a little complicated. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing for Prop 63. We'll be identifying best practices and developing resources for the courts and local jurisdictions related to it. Perhaps if it's a need for broader protocols and procedures, we'll develop those as well. So then, next slide. So the other piece of the funding then, as was mentioned, can go through to the collaborative courts. And this was the intent, was that there's a huge need in terms of mental illness and substance use disorder, people in the criminal court system, that they can access services and work on those issues through this process. And so the way that it was determined would be the best in term from the funders was to fund collaborative courts. Probably familiar with collaborative courts. They've been proven through research to be effective, cost effective, and also efficient in improving recidivism outcomes, lowering recidivism as well as behavioral health outcomes, and reducing usage and substance use disorders. The programs promote accountability by combining judicial supervision with rigorously monitored rehabilitation, treatment, and community services in lieu of detention. So the SCIP funding then will be allow the courts to expand these programs. In some jurisdictions, we think they will actually be setting up new programs, new drug, mental health, and veterans treatment courts, but they will, all the jurisdictions that receive funding will have to use them to expand their programs as well. To increase caseload sizes, we anticipate most of the funding will end up going, or a big chunk of the funding will be subcontracted out to service providers as well. That's typically where it goes. We have done a number of these grant programs with collaborative courts, and that's a big bulk of the funding does end up getting subcontracted out to the local behavioral health entities. And then we will also be supporting these collaborative court programs through trainings, technical assistance. We have gatherings of collaborative court coordinators regularly and conferences. So we'll be doing all of that on the collaborative court side. And that's my general overview. I'll send it back to Ian, but I can also answer questions, or we can wait until the end. Okay, no one has.
Any questions? Yes.
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much for the presentation. Kirk Haynes, Chief Probation Officer in Fresno County. When you talk about Prop 63 and, when it was implemented, it was one of the concerns I know we've had as chiefs is that it was an unfunded mandate, and we pretty much had to pull existing staff in order to get that work that's required to be done. Very important work, of course, safety being the utmost particular of that when it comes to firearms, but locally, it's taken some concerted effort in order to figure out, who is responsible to do what and some of the things. And so I saw in some of the materials where it was talked about, those processes vary from county to county. There's been virtually no training that's been offered to our officers who have been doing this since Prop 63 came into play 4 years ago or somewhere around that time, maybe even a little bit longer. But really happy to see that there's an effort for us to be able to get training, some coordination of the funding, and any funding so that we can provide some resources to this process. So looking forward to how this information and how the funding is going to roll out, because I think the other part of the funding is this pass through the Judicial Council and how we can make that streamlined as much as possible so it can get to the place where it really needs to be. But thank you so much.
Great, thanks. And yeah, probation will be our first stop once we get this running.
Any other board members? Yes.
I just said not knowing as much about court funding. It sounds horribly painful, at least from from talking to the courts in our county. So when you think about funding just broadly for the courts in terms of how you would use it to apply to this problem, what would you imagine? What would be an example of something you would want to enhance or fund?
Well, for the collaborative court piece, we've done that, and typically it does go to behavioral health, but the courts do identify their greatest need for the collaborative court. Is that what the Prop 63 might be slightly different? but-
I'm just thinking about this funding, and let me just say the reason I'm asking is that, as I think about the challenge we're having on the ground, I think about even if we have processes, one, people really don't know what they are, even with gun restraining orders. But two, we have people who go to court all the time and say, I don't have firearms, and they do. So we have to go get them, and that
Uh-huh.
requires law enforcement to, it's very unsafe, and we want them to have the resources they need to go collect firearms. And so in our county, in fact, just yesterday, we pulled some grant money together and then put some county money so that we could fund, frankly, the police departments in our community to create a collaborative to go get guns from people who shouldn't have them. So anyway, I'm
that's
just trying to
interesting.
understand the way the role of the courts with this resource is being imagined. And by the way, I'm not picking on the courts because, and so anybody from Santa Clara County who's listening, I'm not picking on the courts, but I'm really just trying to
Yeah.
understand it relative to this problem we're
Right.
trying to solve.
Right. That's an excellent point. So for the relinquishment piece of this, so I think the collaborative court piece, that's probably clear that we're really not forced, but the legislation does say these are the three ways that the collaborative or courts can use the funding through those three different mechanisms. So that's that part. In terms of Prop 63, it's a little trickier because there is a whole other effort going on in terms of gun relinquishment procedures for civil restraining orders. This funding actually bars the usage of it for unless if you are represented. So if you are, if you have on the civil side, I'm sorry, this might be getting in the weeds. Is that okay?
No, that's totally.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
so on the civil side, the funding forces you have to have representation, so legal representation. Basically, public defenders would have to represent the individuals who are the subject of gun violence restraining orders in order to receive this funding. And that would be very different than the way the California courts work at this point, because it's a civil process. There's no right to counsel. And, it would have to be a legislative decision if they wanted to prioritize sort of the gun owner's rights over, say, someone who's accused of domestic violence and has a domestic violence restraining order. It might actually impact how people choose which restraining order to use as well. So that's one of the pieces that makes it tricky. We couldn't use the funding necessarily for that piece of it, but we also do have funding available through the different project through the Judicial Council for the civil side. So we're going to work closely and essentially mirror that. There's more funding there. The funding's going through the courts, but it's also the courts are then subcontracting with, and I can actually talk about that later, but it's different, but the courts are subcontracting then with law enforcement and jails and what have you in the area. So that's, yes, yeah. So that's happening as well. So we thought the part that's missing from that project and from this is really even understanding on the criminal side how it's working, because it's so different across the board. And we really need to understand what's working and what's not.
And I will just say, in our county, we had to create a process, like the whole thing's been built from scratch. It's
I
relatively
know,
new.
right?
Yeah. it's a mess.
San Mateo has, there's some counties that have processes, but that's exactly it. You shouldn't have to. So, I mean, we weren't staffed enough to do it. Hopefully, if we get this funding, that's the sort of thing that we can help and gather all of it, identify which ones work well and which ones don't.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.
Yes.
Has there been any, Andy Mills from Palm Springs, has there been any thought from the courts to prioritize based on evidence-based best practices, prioritize which guns are gone after first? Because we know that domestic violence, according to U.S. Secret Services, that's a higher propensity to wind up in a mass shooting.
Right.
People who have used firearms for, with injury in the past. I mean, those are the kind of things, because right now, what we get are emails from the courts or from probation saying this person is prohibited with literally no other information. And we get a flood of them, and it's just really, it seems to me, to cover everybody's posterior, rather than actually following up. So I think if there was some prioritization by the courts, that would be, probably pretty helpful.
Yeah, that's, I don't believe that's happened, but that's good information to bring back as we're just starting this up. Thank you. It's very helpful.
Madam Chair, It's Katie, just a comment on that, Chief Mills, and also Supervisor Chavez, Francine mentioned in passing, but the County of San Mateo is really doing well on these kinds of things. And although it is time consuming and all the rest, I do think there has to be support for, and I hope some of this funding can go directly to that, support for counties to convene very specifically on what you're talking about, Chief Mills. How should we prioritize? I mean, the law does require guns to be relinquished, but I think the points you make are really, really important. If we're trying to make the biggest impact on reducing gun violence, reducing mass shootings, that tie to cases involving domestic violence is really important. And I think San Mateo provides a whole lot of great information, which I know they'll share with us about what they did to bring the people to the table who were, all involved, everybody from the court to the DA, PD, service providers, and all the rest, to put those local procedures in place in the most meaningful ways possible. So really great questions.
Just two things on that as you prepare for this, Chair. One is if the money goes to the counties directly, very often it does not trickle down to the municipalities. And that's a very difficult, thing for us. And the second part of this, there's two different prongs of the gun relinquishment. The first prong is those are prohibited by the courts. The second prong are the gun violence restraint orders, which all of us are using on a regular basis to really take the hands out of dangerous people. And I know that has saved lives. So, either one of those, will need funding if we are going to be successful in the long term at the municipal level.
That's a good point.
Yes.
So I guess since we have formed this new council, and I understand this federal funding that's coming through is for a very narrow purpose, but in line with what Chief Haynes and Sheriff Dykes mentioned, the hard part is we're getting small pieces of funding for segments of our system. And the reality is we really need to work towards getting all those partners funded because these are complicated cases at times and take a lot of staff time, and they are complicated and dangerous also. So I'm the sheriff from Lassen County. We just received the DOJ gun violence reduction grant. The sheriff's office did, but the courts applied for the grant that you were mentioning, and I don't believe they got funded. I don't know if there's what I heard is they didn't get funded. So the problem is now, we have people dedicated to it, and luckily we have a strong partnerships, but the reality is, if probation doesn't have the staff available, if the courts don't have the staff available, it's going to really be, a hardship in getting a really comprehensive program like each county needs. So I figured I'd mention that since we have this new council. So thank you.
And I think, as you can see, the board takes this meeting as an advisory, this creation of this advisory boards very seriously. And there's a lot of expertise on this panel and a great deal of concern as to how the plan is going to go forward. And so I would ask of both my own agency and you representing the courts, how do you perceive this going forward? What is the interaction of this board? What junctures will you come back to us with? What will be our decision points, or are we just going to be asked to look at something quickly and say yay or nay?
Okay, that's great. And I know we'll do some planning on that. I do, although can say right off the bat, just because of the subject matter expertise, I think you could be very helpful in sort of getting in and helping us with kind of the research end of it for the Prop 63 piece. So I definitely see it there, but there'll be other things we'll
Okay.
figure out. Yeah.
All right. I mean, I know we're going to look at the plan. I think what I'm sensing here is a grave concern and, somebody taking these obligations seriously and wanting to be involved as this moves forward. And so we want to partner with the courts and
Absolutely.
ensure that all of the bases are covered as much as they can be with this funding.
Great. All right. Thank you. Back again.
And Ian, you may be about to address this, but in terms of the different pots of money available, have we described that yet?
That's in a couple slides.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
we will be getting into that. So thank you. Sorry, speaking in the mic. All right, thank you, Francine. With that background in hand, let me move on to the preliminary program and budget plan, and I want to emphasize preliminary. that staff have developed for Byrne Skip. The tentative plan, excuse me, just to make sure I have the right place. The tentative plan is intended to develop a multi-pronged approach to decreasing gun violence in California, to support local jurisdictions in their efforts to improve firearm relinquishment procedures, and to support the enhancement of collaborative court programs that address behavioral health issues with a focus on people who are at higher risk for gun violence. And I believe this is what you were asking about. Subject to the advisory board's approval, the plan would be implemented by way of 3 sets of subawards. The subawards proposed are as follows. The first would be a subaward to the Judicial Council of California for approximately $16.8 million to expand and enhance collaborative courts, as discussed earlier. The second subaward to the, a second subaward to the Judicial Council of approximately $997,000 would be to expand and enhance collaborative courts in state courts that serve California's less than $10,000 jurisdictions. For reference, the less than $10,000 jurisdictions are generally smaller jurisdictions that are identified by the funding formula used by BJA to determine these allocations. And the $10,000 figure is a reference to that formula, not a specific funding amount for those jurisdictions, just to make sure we're clear on that term. For those of you familiar with JAG, it's the same concept. Third, subawards would be provided to units of local governments totaling approximately 10.7 million to fund activities including but not limited to law enforcement programs to safely secure, store, track, and return relinquished guns, behavioral health deflection programs for those at risk to themselves or others, and programs that support collaborative court processes. The subawards for the less than $10,000 jurisdictions and to the units of local government correspond to the pass-throughs required by Byrne Skip that I referenced earlier when I showed the funding chart. The proposed plan also allocates approximately 3% of the total award, or about $750,000 in administrative costs to the BSCC to manage the program. The solicitation allows for up to 10% of the award to be allocated for administrative costs. However, we anticipate that a portion of the administrative costs available will be required by the Judicial Council for their part in administering the program. The awards currently pending consist of funds for fiscal years of 2022 and 2023 combined as a single award and cover a 4-year performance period from October 2022 to September of 2026. A further 3 years of additional funding is expected for this program. So that's something that this advisory board may evaluate when additional rounds of funding come along for those additional allocations. As I mentioned earlier, staff anticipates submitting a program and budget plan for approval at the April meeting of the advisory board. This concludes my presentation. And of course, I'm here to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions?
I'm sorry, Linda, I have
ahead.
one. So Ian, this may be a question for you or Francine, I'm not really sure, but as a result of this, and since we're trying to make decisions, obviously data is good with that. Going back to the collaborative court piece of this, a lot of that Francine mentioned goes to like departments of behavioral health. And I can tell you from the local perspective, once it goes that direction, a lot of data doesn't come back to measure the effectiveness of these things. And I think as an advisory committee, we need that data. I know there are laws that do exist that allow for that data exchange and not just, hiding behind HIPAA sometimes and some of the other things that go on. But I think that would be important to this group to try to determine the effectiveness so we can be in an advisory capacity. And I just didn't see anything in the program presented either way that there was any data coming back in terms of those things.
Yes, sir. The Byrne Skip program has a data collection element to it where the subawards do what we call performance measurement tools, report results back to us that we report to the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And of course, the results of those could be provided to this advisory board as well.
Yeah, no, I think that would be helpful. I think because we're talking about mental health and a number of things, obviously homelessness, all these other things that surround this particular issue. I see point in time counts in all counties clicking up, not clicking down. And so I think those performance metrics for this group would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. I have a question about the evidence base for the proposal. Of course, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that collaborative courts are effective on a variety of outcomes. Is there any evidence to suggest it's effective on reducing gun violence for those who participate in collaborative courts?
I think I would ask.
There's not, thanks for that question. And this is where it gets a little confusing, but there's, it's guns, but it's also collaborative courts. The research has not been done that I'm aware of to date on that. There's no specific tie-in from the collaborative courts to gun violence. This has been asked quite a bit, other than the piece where the Congress and the Biden administration decided that what the mental health piece was really necessary. And they wanted a way to get people in the criminal justice system to have those services. And this was the way to do it. But there's no specific things about collaborative courts and gun violence.
Okay, thank you. And of course, I'm a sociologist, so I would like to know, would I be able to review the data collection request that's been put together for this program? In other words, could I look at what data would be requested from subward recipients?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great, thank you.
We have the required data that the Byrne SCIP required, or the BJA requires us to report. We have that format, so or we have an indication from BJA of what they require us to report back.
Okay, great,
So
thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Cindy.
Could I ask what the definition of deflection is as it's used in this document?
to my understanding, that's often called diversion, a program to divert someone from criminal justice involvement, as opposed to, I believe it's a similar term.
So it's just the new version of diversion?
Well, yes, diversion is the term, or deflection, I think.
Well,
you just-
it's used in this, and I wanted it
Yeah.
as a term of art. I just wanted to know what the art was.
So I'm not, to be honest, I'm not familiar with the term deflection. I've never heard it used.
Yeah, Supervisor Chavez, I only saw it in the last 6 months or so, and I believe it's very similar to diversion. My assumption, which I haven't done the research yet, is that it generally involved diversion that included behavioral health treatment, but we can look that up and get back
Well,
to you.
and part of the reason I'm asking is that I think this goes back to a very fundamental question we're trying to answer, which is what activity actually reduces gun violence? And what's hard, and I think you asked a great question, and I would be very interested in understanding at the end of all of this, and especially, just given this opportunity to fund some training and thinking about it, is how do we know we moved the dial? And are we, and one of the challenges is looking at year-to-year data can be very deceiving in terms, you could have one serious mass incident, for example. So I don't know. And let me also say that I think that as it relates, the reason I was asking about deflection particularly is that as we've been wrestling in our own communities about how we address behavioral health issues and making sure we're providing enough support. One area that has concerned me is that violent crime, using violent crime to speak to behavioral health and drug and alcohol and substance abuse writ large is a challenge. And I think we really are talking about a subset of the population, and refining that as much as possible is what I would really like to understand. And I know we can't predict every action, but what concerns me is that we may be applying very broad strategies to a subset of people that are in fact very dangerous. And as an example, one of the issues that was raised in this document, and it's something that I've been looking quite a lot at, is the correlation between substance abuse relative to acts of violence. And again, we conflate behavioral health and substance abuse. Sometimes that's appropriate, sometimes it's not. So in any case, I do feel like what we're trying to understand may be very difficult, but I'd like to understand what tools we want to use to quantify it so that we better understand when we're being effective and not on this issue.
Yeah, as you can see, the board is engaged, interested, and has some great questions. And I look forward to a deep dive into some of the answers that they're asking for.
And we would as I mentioned, there are certain metrics that we're required to collect anyway as
Right.
part of those regular reports. So if we wanted to build anything else into that, we would have to decide to do that.
I guess my question is, in what scenario do we begin to suggest other elements we want to collect and look at? Or is that in the purview of this advisory board, or is that something that the judicial council will? Yeah, that'd be great. Anybody that wants to speak to these difficult questions, jump up.
I just don't want to get too much into the weeds, but we do actually have a different BJA grant for collaborative courts to identify standard data definitions, because like everything else, they're all different across each county. And what's graduation? What does that mean? So we are actually using what we've learned through that to apply some core data elements that we know we want to put into the collaborative courts. We've been working with a national organization on that. I don't know the tie into gun violence. I'm not sure this program is going to really get to that. I want to manage expectations with that, but it will be, we have a data set that will contribute.
And I think if I could through the chair, I think one of the opportunities we have frankly is to recognizing that this is just a piece of a program, is sharing data so that we can patch together what we're learning. And so I appreciate that very, very much. But yeah, I concur. Thank you.
It's a challenging project, just the definitions for that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
And just to circle back to part of your question, Madam Chair, when we return in April would be another opportunity for this advisory board to provide additional input to the elements of the plan.
Okay. All right. Back to the board.
Madam Chair, just one simple process question. Simple. These are considered, I'm looking at the amounts, these are considered competitive grants. That's been the kind of the process for Byrne JAG.
That is as of yet to be decided.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a definition of deflection. Here we go. Diversion programs do not always include a formal booking to jail. The person does technically enter the legal system's front door. In contrast, deflection programs entail no criminal legal system involvement beyond the interaction with the police officer in the field.
There you go. As Andy would like to say, that he had the
It's
definition
pre-diversion
too.
deflection.
Yes, yes. Okay. Thank you, thank you. Turning now to members of the public that would like to comment on this item.
Yes, I have two members of the public who would like to comment on this. I have Leslie Crawford.
Okay, I'm here. And
Hello?
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I apologize because I initially wanted to get in the end of this conference, representing Yusuf Miller with the Equity and Justice in San Diego, North County. But I'm listening to the talk on this, and I think I want to say to the board that funding is fine, but Sacramento has a FUBAR issue. Funding is put out by the legislature, but the agencies and departments, it never dribbles down to the people who need to implement the programs. So I initially wanted to talk to you about getting extra mental health people on the board. I lost my son last summer or last fall because I couldn't get him health care before he ended up in a North San Diego jail. But what I'm trying to say to you is you can suggest funding, but unless it gets down to the bottom, what good is it? And the reason I am for extra mental health professionals on your council is because I define you to tell me that there isn't some mental health germ at the bottom of the recent mass shootings. Addiction comes from mental health problems. Homelessness, gun control is no good because it comes across the border. So you have to identify who are these people that are using the guns to shoot. Many times they have mental health problems in their past. So I really believe mental health is the core. And well, you know, I know you have problems, but funding is not the problem. Funding doesn't work if it doesn't get to the people who need to have the funds. And I love California, but we really have a problem dribbling down. So I will end this and not bother you, but
No bother.
think-
Thank you for your remarks.
I think everything leads back to mental health. I
Thank you.
defy you to challenge me on that. We all have a globe on top of our head. Thank you and very much
Thank
for
you.
your opportunity.
We have three more. That's, the next one would be Rod Wade.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity to be on this call. I'm from Fresno, California, and I'm a part of a program called Advanced Peace. We have similar models throughout the state. And what we do with these gun violence incidents in the other states that have advanced peace programs nationwide is we address those core individuals that are actually out here committing those type of offenses. We have communication relationships with probation officers, either juveniles or adults that are getting charged for gun charges. And what we try to do, especially if we catch them at the younger ages, is we try to mentor these young men. A lot of them are going through different things, homelessness, shelter, and a lot of them really don't want to be out there, but it's survival. And a lot of them is just doing things based on trying to live. Now, mind you, there are some doing outside things, these mass shootings and things of those natures. But the way the fellowship work for us is that we engage these individuals on a daily basis, 3 to 4 times a day, as sort of like a mentorship. We give them training, we teach them life skills. We actually make them build a life map of what they actually want to achieve in life and set goals for them that make it attainable for them. And it's an 18-month program where, you know, we interact and we seeing what's going on in the home. We help them with job searches. We help them with job clothing. We help them with food. We help them with housing in some cases. We there though for them like a dad. A lot of these people don't really have nobody that's ever loved them before, that never took the time to see what's going on with them and what's wrong with them. And that's basically what we do. It's a thing where, and it's an 18-month progress. And without the love, locking them up, some of them do have mental issues, but without caring for them, instead of just locking them up and throwing them away, we're gonna keep repeating the same things that they did. I think love at the bottom core is what will help in a lot of these situations. And that's what we do. We take the time out to care for these dudes. We check up on them on the daily morning call. Before I get up and come to work, I call all of my guys on my caseload. How you doing this morning? What's your plan for today? What you got on the agenda? If one of them need a ride to work, if I can't get there for them, I Uber them. If they need close to an interview, I provide that. We get them social security cards, driver's license, ID, birth certificates. Just taking the initiative to invest in them and show them something better. I think if we invest in more programs that is actually dealing with the individuals that are dealing with the crimes, and once you build those relationships, from those relationships, you'll see that, okay, we got a mental health issue here, or we got no parents in the house, a single mom, no guidance, no structure, or you see some other stuff, he's been in an abusive relationship.
I think we're
Or
gonna have to
abusive
ask you to
household.
wind down just a bit here.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Thanks.
ma'am. I just wanted to say that, you know, there are some programs that have been effective that keep data on those type of programs. And in our city, the first year we brought the violent crime down 35%.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Amir Chappelle.
Good afternoon, members of the BSCC Advisory Drag Board. Pleasure to be here. Amir Chappell. I just wanted to talk about the presentation that specifically outlined, you know, some of the rough ideas of where the funding would go. And I just want to urge the advisory board to consider using some of the SCIP funding for a statewide landscape analysis. You know, I heard a lot about trying to reduce gun violence, and when you do that at the city level, the end result is in the identification of the individuals that are actively engaging in violence in that community. So the targeted interventions can focus on that small subset of population that somebody on the board was talking about. And so I just wanted to be sure also that the committee considered some of the other activities. I heard about collaborative court programs. I'm not sure if that entails specialty courts, but there is some literature around the impact and effectiveness of gun violence courts, which is a type of specialty courts that specifically would focus on this subset of the population. There's some in Philadelphia, in Brooklyn, in Jefferson County, Alabama, and things of that nature. I also wanted to urge the committee to think about some of the other aspects that the SCIP plan funding that allows for, which is that technology and information sharing. The development of a validated gun violence risk assessment tool, looking at some assertive community treatment programs, triage services, and other behavioral health services. And so I just want to urge the committee to think about adding some measures that the state of California and this advisory board thinks are relevant to assessing the impact and effectiveness of how the funding is being doled out and allocated. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we have Saxon's.
We'll just go with Saxon.
Yeah.
Are you there?
Hi, yes, sorry, I am here. I'm a little confused on which topic we're on, but I'm just gonna go ahead and state sorry, I had to leave the meeting earlier
Well,
to do a
I can help
CBS.
you. We're on the Byrne SCIP agenda item.
Okay, no, I would like to talk about my brother dying in custody, so I will go ahead and give up my turn right now and come back to when we get to that.
Thank you. Thank you. We
Okay.
look forward to hearing from you.
And once again, we have Yusuf Miller.
The same thing. I was a little confused. I'll wait for the dying in custody
Okay.
campaign talk.
I appreciate your patience. Thank you. Thank you. We're a little doing things a little differently today, so I apologize for any confusion you may have out there.
That's it for public comments.
Thank you very much. So we have public comment. The board, anything further after public comment? Seeing none. I don't think this is an action item, so we will adjourn this portion of our meeting. And to our ad hoc members that joined us today, Andrea and Eloisa, thank you so much, and we look forward to meeting with you again.
Thank you.